Hey guys, thank you for joining me in another video. In this video I'm going to talk about a game that I played. It was a classical time control, and I think that it's an important game because it really is, it highlights the importance of development in the early game and then also moving your pieces in such a way that they facilitate the smooth development of your other pieces. So in the game I had white pieces, and I started with e4, e5, knight f3, and then here my opponent makes the first interesting move of the game, bishop to d6. And so this move blocks in this d pawn, which would put any plans for a d5 pawn push on hold, at least for the time being. And also now this light squared bishop has even more of a difficult time trying to be developed. So usually I would play in just a normal opening, bishop to b5, but I thought with this unusual move, maybe I should try something different. And in any case, um, my opponent just pushed a6, and then we waste time for no reason. And so you don't want to waste time in chess. So after bishop to d6, bishop to b4, uh, I guess preventing a fried liver attack, but I wasn't going for that anyway. This move doesn't really contest the center, and it doesn't facilitate development of any of his pieces. Castling kingside, knight to f6, rook to e1, and then castling kingside. And so here I noticed the placement of his two minor pieces that he had developed was rather odd, and if only I could eliminate this pawn on d5 and push d5 myself, my opponent would be in a world of hurt. So I thought, okay, well, the first way I'm going to go about doing this is pushing d4, because now if e takes, then mission accomplished. So instead of taking, my opponent played knight to c6, and now I could have taken on d4 here, or rather knight to c6, and then I played bishop to b5. The purpose for knight to c6 was to maintain or attempt to maintain control over d5, and removing the knight would weaken black's control over the square. E takes on d4, and now removing the defender of the d5 square, pawn takes bishop, and then mission accomplished. e5, two minor pieces are forked, bishop to b4, attacking the rook, c3, pawn takes, and now we're back to square one. Two minor pieces are hanging, exchanging queens, trying to simplify probably, and then bishop takes, knight takes, and then moving the knight to safety. So my opponent thought. I could just play, well, in the game I played bishop to a3, and can you find a better move? So you may want to take a moment to pause real quick and find the best move. The best move is h3, and that's taking advantage of the fact that the knight really doesn't have anywhere safe to go, and it's simply trapped. Instead, I wanted to attack the rook, and I didn't see that in the moment. Moving the rook to safety, and then rook to e1, defending my central pawn. f6, weakening lots of squares around the king. You can make the case that because the queens are off the, you could make the case that because the kings are off the board, and I don't have a light squared bishop, that perhaps it's not too serious of an issue, at least in the moment being. But maybe if I can get a knight somewhere in here, that might be pretty dangerous for the king. f6 though was played, and now finally h3, and still the knight doesn't really have anywhere to go, so knights are just exchanged, and then rooks are exchanged, centralizing my other rook that has been kind of sitting the rest of the game out. And so now we see that I have three pieces developed, and I have, this bishop on this really long, nice diagonal. This knight controls lots of open squares, and then my rook is poised to take control over the e file. And so, at the same time, my opponent still hasn't developed his light squared bishop and still hasn't developed his a-rook. You could say that, maybe it's not all lost at this point for my opponent, though white is winning in this position. Maybe it's not all lost because my opponent does possess a pretty serious queenside pawn majority. As we can see, 4 pawns to my 1 queenside pawn. And so at this point I thought, okay, well, maybe it's not cause for concern because they're mostly on the 7th rank right now. But that may be a problem in the coming future. So the game continued. Bishop to d7, of course taking the free pawn, rook to e8, and as I just said, my opponent has this pretty large queenside pawn majority, and I thought of this move for a while. Would it be the smartest move to exchange rooks? Because I thought, this rook may be useful in helping to stifle any advances my opponent may have conjured up. And so, I could have played maybe, the line I saw in my head was rook a5, oops, pressed the wrong button, rook a5, of course defending the pawn, rook to a4, attacking my hanging a2 pawn, or my a2 pawn rather. It's not hanging because the knight's defending. And then black kind of moved into this pin here, king f7, freeing the rook from defending the bishop, and then trying to remaneuver my bishop. Of course, this hanging c7 pawn is a target here, and then after maybe b5, bishop to e3 is a strong move because it prevents any immediate c5 pawn pushes. Of course, a c5 pawn push would help to facilitate further pawn pushes, and so I'm trying to slow these 4 pawns down as much as I can, buy myself some time. But also in this position, white's just doing better. In the game, rooks were exchanged. Bishop takes on e8, and then I played bishop to c1, looking to remaneuver, king to f7, improving the position of the king. In games, it's important that you have a centralized king. Bishop to f4, king e6, bishop takes on c7, of course, king to d7, bishop to b8, a5, bishop to e5, g6, bishop to f4, h5, and then bishop to e4. And so here one move I had thought up was threatening to fork the king and the bishop over on f6. And I was thinking of other moves as well, because again, while I have captured 1 pawn on the queen side, there's still a 3-to-1 pawn majority for black. And so maybe giving up one of my minor pieces this early wouldn't be the best move, but certainly playable. Bishop to f7, a3, and here I want to get all my square pieces from this point on dark squares, because with my bishops, my opponent's bishop on this very, very powerful light square diagonal, he's able to travel to any light square. The idea was to kind of starve him by putting all my pieces on dark squares, because of course he can't get to those. Another way to have continued instead of pushing a3 after bishop to f7 would be knight to e6, and of course I have this double attack here, and defending the bishop. Knight takes on b7, bishop takes on a2, and then knight takes on a5. And then, of course, defending the last remaining of the queenside pawn. But in the game, I played a3. My opponent played bishop to d5, check, moving the king to safety, and then bishop to d2, attacking the hanging a pawn, b5 defending, retreating the knight, and then trying to get this king over here to support a eventual kingside pawn push. Knight f4, bishop to f7, and then king to f1, trying to improve the position of my king. Because if my opponent is going to go to centralize his king and get his king in the battle, then I want to do the same for my own. King to a6, knight to d3. Tricky move here, because then my opponent played bishop to c4, creating this uncomfortable pin, but it's okay because I'm still winning here. So king to e2, king to b5, unpinning my king, take the knight, take the bishop. And at this point I thought, okay, well maybe it's probably time I think about pushing this kingside pawn majority. c5, g4, check, king to safety, h takes on g4, h takes on g4, king to c5, f4, b5, pawn's trying to roll down the board, f5, b4 check, taking the pawn, check, and then king to c2. And so I'm trying to stay in front of these two pawns here, help support my bishop as much as the king can, and really I think that this king is kind of tied down to these two pawns here, you know, and at the same time it maybe is these double pawns or these protected pawns here are posing quite a threat to black at this point. b3 check, and then king to c3, preventing any further pawn pushes on the queen side. G takes on f5, and so far I've managed to maintain my advantage over black the entire game. And here I really had to stop and think. Or perhaps that's what I should have done. Because now I have two options. I say, okay, well, do I take back on f5 or do I push g5? What would you do? I noticed that if I immediately just took, then the king would be inside the square of this pawn. And so, after, king d6, f6, and then, king e6, f7, the king can catch up to the pawn. And so I wanted to prevent that. And so if maybe my dark squared bishop wasn't on the board, then I would be justified in this logic. Maybe. But since I do have a dark squared bishop, this game could have continued after taking, king to d5, trying to catch up to the pawn, and bishop to f4. And so now, the king doesn't really have any easy way of catching up to this pawn. King c6, f5, king d7, defending the pawn, king e6, bishop to d4, king f7, trying to get in front of the pawn, king takes, b2, bishop takes, of course, not really any other moves here. And so now black, of course, has to move his king, and then king b5 coming up to prepare another advance by my pawn, king to f7, waiting move, king g5, and then now it's easy to see how the game would continue here, and there's really no stopping this very, very dangerous f pawn. In the game, after pawn takes, I played g5, and that was an ill-conceived move because this is actually a draw. This would actually be a draw if my opponent played carefully, because he could now he has the move king to d5, d6. If check, king e6, king b2, and now the king has gotten in front of my passed pawn, and there's really not a way for us to continue here with an advantage for white, because now bishop to c1, still have to maintain defense of my passed g pawn, king g7, and this is a drawn position. Fortunately for me, unfortunately for my opponent, after I pushed the pawn, king to b5, I'm not really sure why the move was played. g6, there's no stopping the passed pawn now. And so queen, and at this position actually black resigned. We had a nice talk after the game, and so that was good. King to a2, the game could have continued this way, taking on c4, king a1, taking on b3. The only move for black here is to push f4, and then, of of course, checkmate. So, as I said earlier at the beginning of the video, I think this game was instructive because it really showed how stifling one's development, hindering the development of one's own minor pieces, can really lead to some very dangerous positions. And in this game, I've really tried to show how I attempted to exploit those weaknesses, despite my one blunder in the end game here. Thankfully, I was able to come back. Um, do you ever find yourself in cramped positions in the opening? I know I certainly do, especially playing the Caro Kann defense every now and then. Uh, it can be a challenge for even the best players, but it's important to learn from the mistakes that you make in your own games, uh, see how you can improve your development in future games and improve your strategy overall. So with that being said, I hope that you found this video instructive, that you can learn from it, and until the next video, I wish you good luck in your chess, and bye for now.